Fans of the Montreal Canadiens still scratch their heads as to why they didn't win the Stanley Cup in 1975. They definitely had the offense, they had the defense, they had Ken Dryden in net, Henri Richard was still with the team, Guy Lafleur was scoring in bunches, Jacques Lemaire was there, good defensive core. Even though players like Glenn Sader and Don Orey shouldn't have been there in the first place, they were well loaded for a game. But the big problem that year is Ken Dryden couldn't win in Buffalo. Now, there was numerous close games that Montreal lost in Buffalo because Buffalo had home ice advantage. Game 3 and Game 4 back at the Forum were blowouts. Montreal won 7-0 in A2. Lafleur had a hat trick in the third game. Even Glenn Sader scored for Montreal in Game 4. Now, if you only watch the games in Montreal in the loss in overtime in the key Game 5 and loss at home in the key Game 6, you're saying to yourself, how is a team with Jerry Desjardins and Roger Crozier in net can beat Montreal in 6 games? Here's what I think. Buffalo played rope-a-dope again at the odd with Don Luce and Craig Ramsey and other defensive players. You had Jerry Corab on the defense, the big French connection line that was scoring a goal when it was needed to be scored. Montreal, 15-2, they outscored Buffalo at the Forum. There's no way in the world that the Montreal Canadiens should have lost that series. But again, Ken Dryden was not making the big saves in Buffalo. That was a big factor. He was away from the Habs for the 74 season, articulating or articling as a lawyer. We had Wayne Thomas and Michel Place for most of that year, and obviously with Bonnie Larocque trying to lead the playoff against the Rangers didn't work out. But Ken Dryden, there was occasions, especially in that first series against Vancouver where he lost one game, he seemed a little bit off his game. Now, I'm not saying Buffalo didn't deserve to win, but Buffalo wasn't a better team than Montreal that year. From stem to stern, Montreal was well packed with game. Yvon Lambert was starting to rise. Mario Tremblay was becoming a factor. Steve Shutt as well. Steve Shutt was on the midst of being a potential future superstar. And, defensively, they were pretty good. And Yvon Cornway. So, again, you got Lafleur, Shutt, Lemaire, Cornway, Richard, Lambert, all these key players. Savard Robinson on point on defense because Robinson was pretty well, reaching his level, and he still couldn't win. Now, I don't know if anybody out there has the tapes of Game 3 against Game 4, but I watched those games. And I said to myself, hey, Montreal had a tough start. They're going to make a comeback. And he fell in the same trap in Game 5 that he fell in 1 and 2. They were intimidated by Ramsey and Luce and the other defensive players for Buffalo. Again, Roger Crozier, Jerry Desjardins are not what you call Stanley Cup goalies. They're both number 2s. They were never number 1s. Crozier was well past his prime. Because 66 he won the Conn Smythe, by the 70s, again he was at the tail end of his career, and Desjardins was highly ranked, but he never was more than a number 2, like by an Esposito or with the King system. All in all, ladies and gentlemen, 15 goals in 2 games against the Buffalo Sabres, purportedly one of the best defensive team that year. Montreal felt intimidated by the auditorium. Maybe it was the fans. Maybe it was just worried about some of the older players on the team. Richard was his last season. But, it's funny how sports goes. Like I said, sometimes the best team doesn't win. And pound for pound, Montreal, player for player, was 4 or 5 players better than the Sabres that year. But for Sabres fans, that maybe hurt them for the Stanley Cup final because beating Montreal maybe took all the energy out. And when they played the Flyers in 6 games and lost in 6 games, they couldn't score in Game 6 at home. Maybe they left too much on the table. Maybe they just wanted to beat Montreal because that was the Stanley Cup to them, and that year it wasn't. Philadelphia was a great defensive team like Montreal was. Sure, he fought, but there was 4 lines. Bobby Clarke, very very underrated defensive forward. McClish had a good playoff that year. You had the Grinders in the 3rd and 4th line. The Watsons on defense, it adds up. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a chance, look at Game 1 and Game 2 of the Buffalo-Montreal series on YouTube, and just put in your mind, this is the same team that bet Montreal the first 2 games, gave up 15 goals in 2 games at the Forum. And Gilbert Perreault conquered the Forum as a member of the Montreal Junior Canadiens. My old friend Alan Glebinski said he was the king of the Forum. And I tend to agree. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you're doing here with our Buffalo Sabres and Montreal Canadiens podcast, let us know with a like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for listening. Bye.